tongue or pen can never tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. The guilty pair bow down with care. God gave His Son to win this erring child. He reconciled and pardoned from His sin. Oh, love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels song. Time shall pass away, and earthly thrones and kingdoms fall, when men who hear refuse to pray on rocks and hills and mountains call. God's love so sure shall still endure, all measureless and strong, redeeming grace to Adam's race. The saints and angels sung. The love of God, how rich shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels soar. Oh yeah. Could we think the ocean fill, or were the skies of parchment made? Were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above, would train the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. Oh, love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels soar. Oh, love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels song.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Corey. I have the distinct pleasure of being the lead pastor here at Westwinds, and this is
Hi, I'm Carrie Barbalia.
Carrie. And we are, we're going to have a conversation about a passage of scripture in the book of James. So we have been through the summer having these kind of different approaches to the text, like we often have teaching and conversations happen, I think, like in people's cars and that kind of thing. But we thought it'd be fun for this summer for the book of James to have these kind of public conversations. And those are almost done. This is the last one.
I know.
This is it. I've really enjoyed these, actually.
Me too.
I've enjoyed being in them. And then I was traveling the last few weeks and I really enjoyed listening into them. It's a way different approach. But yeah, so because we move indoors next week, and then 2 weeks from now, we're back to 2 services inside. Our live stream will be back to the way it used to be. Some people will be happy about that. So yeah. And today we're talking about James chapter 1, starting in verse 19. And we're going to read this. And this one, like other passages, James comes on a little strong. We were joking earlier that English James is very strong. So let's see. Do you want to read our passage, and then read it, and then maybe you could just, like, when we're done, say, like, this is what is driving me nuts about this one, and then that should be a great conversation.
Yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So James 1, verse 19 through 25. My dear brothers and sisters, understand this: everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For human anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Therefore, ridding yourselves of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, humbly receive the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like someone looking at his own face in a mirror. For he looks at himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of person he was. But the one who looks intently into the perfect law of freedom and perseveres in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer who works, this person will be blessed in what he does.
So in today's episode of What Drives You Nuts About James, Carrie, what hits you weird this time?
Well, there's a couple things. I think I was saying this a little bit ago, but I think for me, the thing I trip up on is the be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. I think for me, that can come across really like, well, you've got to do all the things. You've got to check all the boxes.
Yep.
And that's, probably like my own personal wiring.
Sure.
But I guess I could go to a space easy of being like, well, so I got to do all the things, or if I don't, I'm deceiving myself.
Right.
Per this guy.
Yes. I mean, you can, I'm sure there are personal reasons for that, but I do think we live in like a achievement culture.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it can, and I think sometimes we can't, we've all been kind of formed by that, this kind of Western achievement culture. And so we always bring that, but, and I actually think probably the earliest listeners would have had a similar mindset, but more around like the religion of their upbringing, that these would have been early Jewish Christians who were believing something new about their faith, this kind of Jesus as the fulfillment of their faith. And these early house churches are wrestling with this, but they would have come from a background of like, what does it look like to be good Jews, right? What they wouldn't have had though is like in our society, we can be outed for not doing things well.
Yeah.
I don't ever get the sense that Jews worry about that unless they create like egregious sins against people,
Sure.
Because they're born Jewish, right? And so it was just more about how to be more Jewish or better Jews or more faithful kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good question. I when I think about this, I think the challenge is maybe the way we think about application and the immediacy of application. So I think the next kind of sentences help us understand not what James says, but what James means, which is like, I think a really important piece. Often we read the Bible and we want to be like, maybe you ever hear like, well, the Bible says it, so I do it, right? I think it's actually like a really poor way to read the Bible. That part of the journey is like learning what is meant, not necessarily what is said. I do think like, so those who hear but don't do the word are like those who look at their faces in a mirror. They look at themselves, walk away, and this is important, right? They immediately forget what they were like. So what James is calling out, I think, is kind of hearing the word, and for them, they're thinking about like understanding how the teachings of Jesus reframes their world, right? So hearing this, and then they look at themselves and immediately forget that. But it says, but there are those who study the perfect law, or who are, I think your version said like, are intent on it. Study is like long time. Are those who study the perfect law, the law of freedom, and continue to do it. They don't listen and forget, but they put it into practice in their lives. And so I think like the immediacy piece and the like, the outcome piece is like often what we kind of breed into it. But what James, I think, is getting at is less of a like, Jesus said it right now, do it right now, or you're out. And more of the sense of like, actually, it might just means you got to look in the mirror for longer and keep looking in the mirror until you're ready to like turn around and apply. I think the sin or the transgression or the lack of wisdom that James is calling out is like looking in the mirror, seeing this fruit, which earlier in the passage, like anger is kind of what he frames it as, and then pretending it didn't happen or pretending it's not there. I mean, we know, right? The healing journey is not immediate.
No.
It's slow.
Very slow, yeah.
I don't know. Does that track?
Yeah. I think too, the mirror, the context, right, of going into the mirror conversation or verses, like when you see yourself in a mirror, you are. And so it's like, I think maybe what I was hearing you say, or what I was kind of hearing was like, you're not to be doers for the sake of doing, but you are meant to be doing because that is who you are. Like you are supposed to be, or our goal as Christians is to be transformed in the way of Jesus.
Yes.
And that is who we are intended to be.
Yes. Yeah, which I think like James implies that in certain ways, but is not explicit with that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes this is why James is hard to read, because he's like explicit about like the harsh stuff, and then just kind of implies like this idea that like, and I think that's like at this point in the church history too, like this kind of Jewish expression of the Jesus movement wasn't like they were leaving Judaism to go into Christianity.
Right.
It to them was, we're going to become more of who we always were, going all the way back to our ancestors, right? So that's kind of the frame that they're bringing in. So James is maybe less explicit about some of that, but the mirror piece is like kind of can you see beyond the explosion of anger you had? Can you see beyond the other parts of James, the jealousy or the slander, to a deeper place of like who you've been created to be or called to be, and then what does it look like to continue to progress in that direction?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, if I can kind of step out of my stuff where I said I get kind of triggered or something with the doing into the performance or the task-oriented nature that can sound like to me. I think what I'm hearing is like not just being actions focused, but kind of doing that internal work to be curious about why this anger is happening, or why, whatever the thing is, what the vice is, or the sin or transgression is occurring in the first place.
Yeah. It's I've wrestled with my fitness in my 30s, right? So I played sports my whole life, and then at some point my metabolism changed, and I've had a hard time accepting this, to be real honest. And so I'm turning 39 in like 2 months, and I'm really afraid to be like 40 and on a really like decreasing exponential path. So I've started like meeting with a trainer. And one of the things I'm learning about fitness is that I have all these questions about how things work and why things work. It's kind of how my brain is. But one of the things I'm learning about fitness is that like strength is built at the moment of stress. And so for a long time, there was fitness conversations about think about lifting weights. Should I do less weight, more reps? So should I do less weight and more times lifting it? Or should I do heavy weights and less times lifting it? And what the data is beginning to show is that there's actually not a ton of difference. There's like some results, different like performative results, but in the way that muscle builds is actually just how much can you push through the moment of stress. And it's at the moment of stress when the growth happens. And I've been thinking about this actually this week and reading this, because I'm doing this with my body right now. I'm learning how to push myself to these moments of stress so that I can have growth in an area that I've been struggling with. And I think James is doing this throughout his book, but he uses things like anger. And the expression of the anger is this moment of stress. And you, at that point, have the choice, like you do when you're lifting weights, to stop, right? Or to try and push through a little bit. And even to the point of lifting weights that sometimes my trainer, like if I'm trying to get a weight up and I'm at like one of my last reps and I can't like get it any further, he'll even come along and grab the bar and kind of help me a little bit. So the weight's a little bit less, but I can still get the reps done. And will even make me do like 3 or 4 more. And I'm like, I can't, but he'll help, And again, like I think that's like I think that's kind of the picture too of like what James is trying to talk about, even with some of these vices that he so like strongly speaks against in his book sometimes. But he's using it as kind of like, we have these very common moments of stress. And at that moment, we can give up. We can be done. We can walk away and pretend we didn't see it, pretend it didn't happen. Or we can lean in, get some help, talk to some people, and that actually becomes the point of where the growth comes from, rather than it being this like negative in our life and take on as identity. Yeah,
I think
is that helpful? I think
it is. Well, and I was thinking,
I'm like new to fitness, and now I'm like, I got all this fitness advice, everybody.
You're an expert.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking about that when you were talking just now about in verse 21, where it says, ridding yourselves of all moral filth and evil that is so prevalent, like humbly receive this implanted word. And so I think, again, like the task-oriented brain will go like, well, I have to rid myself of all these things. Right. I have to stop being angry or judgmental or whatever the thing might be. But instead, maybe if using your kind of comparison, I have to recognize that I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
And then I have to be able to know that there's grace, like somebody's there to help me with this.
Yes.
And then I can be curious about, why is this behavior showing up? What's at the root of it, or what's just even the next layer?
Yeah.
Not even going all the way down, because that's work. It's time.
100%.
It's a process, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm a person in recovery, and so this is something that we talk about, like being comfortable in our pain.
Yes.
But then at some point you're not.
Yeah.
And you kind of have that moment of like, oh no, I don't want this. And so being willing to just look at it and knowing that like the grace of God and the love of God is there gives you the courage to be able to do that.
Yeah. And maybe like I'm thinking as you're sharing, and I don't want to project this on kind of the recovery process, but I come from a family of alcoholics too. And so, but I think sometimes the danger is like overtaking on that identity. So like, I can't lift this because I'm not a strong person,
Right.
or I'm not strong enough to lift it. And so that's why we like retreat or back off.
Right.
When the truth is like, I can't lift this because I've never pushed through long enough to lift this.
Right.
I've never like faced my weakness long enough or with other people enough or like maybe in a healthier process, or I've never been allowed to. Like I've never worked out with a trainer before. How would I know, right? I've never had a sponsor before or someone who's been there before to kind of help me through this or help me understand this. I don't know, is that metaphor too far? Am I stretching it too much?
No, I think that's true. And I think it's kind of the healing or work or transformation work or recovery work, my world, is probably similar to weightlifting, where it's like one workout at a time, one day at a time is something that like recovery world, that's something we say. But in that kind of that there is that like grace and patience for this like slow process of building muscle or of getting healthy.
Yes. That's good. So, because that's, I mean, I think that's the impetus here, right? Is like, but those who study the perfect law, the law of freedom, continue to do it. What's interesting is like the way these words are used together, like study the perfect law, you'd think like those who like read this really thick book, but the perfect law in the context of James is actually Jesus summing up the law as loving God and loving others. And so how would you study the perfect law? Well, you would practice, live in a space where I am loved by God and loving God, receiving the love of God, and then being able to reciprocate that love of God, receiving the love of others and reciprocating that love of others and growing in the capacity of those spaces. So like, how do you study that law? But doing it, like you have to live into it. And James is saying the foolish person is one who like doesn't listen and maybe like forgets that's the journey. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, this idea of even like looking at the teachings of Jesus or some of those like stress points we hit and thinking about it as a limit is actually, I think, part of what James is pushing against. It's like change your frame. Right? We gotta think about this differently, and we gotta begin to behave differently because of this new thinking. I coach youth hockey, and I often tell my players, like, if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? And so if we want different results, then we need to create different patterns for our team, different practices for our team. We gotta learn new things, and I think that's the journey of healing, the humble journey of healing.
I think one thing that popped in my head when you're talking again too is the idea, and I've noticed this in other places in James. It just took some conversation for me to be able to get there, but just the embodiment of our faith. It's not just like a head thing. Like it's not just hearing it and being able to know, and say what the way of Jesus is. It's actually being able to embody it and to be able to walk that out increasingly every day.
Yes. Again, like Western Eastern issues.
Yeah.
Right? Knowing
Right.
from a Western mind is knowing.
Right.
In my head.
But that wasn't necessarily
No.
with this context,
knowing
right?
is like knowing. Like it's like in my being, in my bones. Like I
Right.
just hearing it doesn't mean I know it. Living it and practicing is how I get to know it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just because we don't, in this, like our Western non-Jewish world might not have that frame or that kind of context for it.
Yeah.
So that helps.
That's good. That's good. Well, that's a great conversation. I think, so I guess I think if someone, I think I just want to say out loud, like if someone is listening to this conversation or is working through the book of James and is feeling very down on themselves, I think I would just encourage us to maybe to hear James differently, and to hear the ways that James is just being intentionally provocative, not to demean us as people, but to continue to call us to fall into grace and to lean into other people and to move towards the love of God and the love of others. And if our application of what we're reading or the way we're hearing it is not moving in those directions, then maybe it just means like maybe I'm reading it wrong. Maybe I'm understanding it wrong.
Yeah.
And to be invited into this healing journey that we all need, right? That we all have these things, that pieces, edges of our life that are growth edges that need work. So
Yeah. Thank you.
Fair enough. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it was. Thanks.
Good. Cool. Well, we'll leave it there. And again, I would love to keep moving forward in this life with these wonderful people that we call Westwinds Church. And so if you'd like to continue to participate in some of these conversations, I would love to have you join us on a Sunday at church. And then who knows where else after that. So thanks, y'all.
We are so happy to have had you with us for Church Online today. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be together each Sunday. If you want to dig deeper into this series we're in, Common, you can go to westwinds.org/common and find out more. You can watch past Common conversations. You can see other sermons in this series, or even some of the music we sing together each week. If you want to hear today's message, tune back in tonight, Sunday at 6 p.m. on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to hear today's message. If you're part of our giving community here at Westwinds, thank you. We think that is awesome. If you want to join us in that today by making a gift, you can go to westwinds.org/give and make a one-time or a recurring contribution. Lastly, today, I want to leave you with a benediction, send you with some words for your week, and it's simply this: may God grant you the wisdom to ask, the faith to take steps, and the patience to remain connected. We'll see you all next Sunday.